Hello, I'm Gemma from EFRAG and welcome to the draft ESRS 2 session. During this session, I will take you through the architecture and key disclosure requirements of this draft standard. ESRS 2 is a pivotal piece of the ESRS system and one of the two cross-cutting standards together with draft ESRS 1 general requirements, as they both sit above sector agnostic and sector specific and cover E, S and G sustainability matters. The relationship between cross-cutting and topical standards is critical for understanding the system and ultimately to ensure that the sustainability statements provide relevant and understandable information. Let me briefly touch upon the key aspects of the draft standard. Since the April ED, this draft has been adapted to 4-pillar structure, aligned with the TCFD and ISSB for convergence purposes. Therefore, we have 4 reporting areas that include the double materiality lens. Hence, we don't have risk management, but impact, risk, and opportunity management instead. And consequently, all topical standards follow the same 4-pillar approach in terms of structure and content. The second aspect to be highlighted is the double materiality assessment. This draft details the disclosures to be provided by the undertaking in relation to the process itself and its outcomes. Given that materiality assessment is core to the application of the ESRSs, this is the starting point for the preparation of the ESRSs. And as mentioned previously, the relationship between ESRS 2 and topical standard is also defined in ESRS 2. And thirdly, the other aspect to be highlighted is the minimal disclosures for policies, actions and targets that shall be disclosed for all material impacts, risks and opportunities. We will start looking at content by looking at the basis for preparation. The first set of disclosure requirements that we find in draft ESRS 2. This consists of 2 disclosure requirements. The first one being disclosed for all undertakings, and it covers aspects such as the scope of the sustainability statements, is it consolidated or individual basis, and also to identify those additional sustainability disclosures that have been included in the sustainability statements in relation to local legislation or generally accepted sustainability reporting pronouncements, given that the ambition here is that the sustainability statement is the repository of sustainability information prepared by the company. The second disclosure requirement, BP2, is the one that applies only when a specific circumstances apply to the undertaking. So, for example, when there's changes in the preparation of the presentation or when the mechanism of incorporation by reference is used. The next one is the governance and reporting pillar. Before we go into the detail, it's important to explain that the governance of sustainability matters is split in 2 parts in the ESRS architecture. On the one hand, ESRS 2 contains those disclosures related to the administrative, management and supervisory bodies, which is role, composition, expertise, or the internal control systems. And as you know, ESRS 2 is not subject to the materiality assessment. And secondly, we have ESRS G1. This draft standard is called business conduct and provides another lens of governance matters with those factors that have been listed in the CSRD. So we are talking here, for example, about payments or the quality of relationship with the suppliers. Draft ESRS G1, though, is subject to the materiality assessment. So in order to obtain a complete picture about the government sustainability disclosure of the entity, the user should be looking at both ESRS 2 and G1. The other disclosure requirements that we have in the governance section of this cross-cutting relate to the statement of due diligence and the integration of sustainability-related performance in incentive schemes. The next reporting pillar is a strategy, which includes one of the core disclosure requirements of the architecture, which is SBM3. The disclosures that we have within a strategy are threefold. SBM1 is aiming at providing a description of its products, markets, customers, and sectors, including revenue information at sector level for the undertaking, where it operates in. The second one is SBM2. It's a due diligence-inspired disclosure regarding how the undertaking considers the views and interests of stakeholders related to the strategy and business model. And the third one with an exclamation mark here, trying to actually differentiate the importance and how core this is in the whole ESRS architecture, is SVM3. This disclosure requirement serves various purposes, and it has been aligned with the EV IFRS S1 for financial materiality effects and GRI universal standards for impact materiality. So what do we have in SVM3? Firstly, we have the disclosure of material impacts, risks, and opportunities that we use the language IRO to simplify it, identifying the materiality assessment, including the time horizon when these are expected to occur, and also changes that we are seeing compared to the previous year. The second element is the effects of material IROs in the undertaking strategy and business model, where there has been any impact, where the management has changed the strategy or the business model to address some of those IROs identified. And the third point, which is highly related, is in relation to the resilience of the undertaking. Therefore, the material IROs identifies and discloses all those that will drive the topical standards that are material for the undertaking. So what we are saying here is that the output of SVM3, the output of the materiality assessment, the disclosure of SVM3 are those that will drive which are the standards and subtopics or even disclosure requirements material for their undertaking. It's also important to see what it says in the asterisk, where it says that in ESRS2 we have the across topics across ES and G data points, but in some cases we have certain specifications of SVM2 or SVM3 at topical level. So in order to comply with ESRS2, the preparers and users should also look at the standards on social, for example, where there's other disclosure requirements or specifications to be more precise on SVM2 and SVM3. We're now moving on towards the IRL management section, which is highly related to the one that we just discussed. And I'm saying that because the first disclosure requirement is the process to identify the IROs. So in here, the undertakings are required to disclose the methodology, the assumptions, and how the materiality assessment was performed. Again, we have some specifications in relation to IRO 1 in topical standards, in particular in relation to environmental and governance topical standards. And this is something that, again, has to be considered when the undertaking is preparing the sustainability information. The other point that is actually quite important as well in the impact, risk and opportunity management is IRO 2. So what IRO 2 is aiming at is at providing a list of all the disclosure requirements that the company has complied with. So similar to a content index that some of the preparers may be used to. It also states, and this is very specific, at topic level, so we're talking about at standard level, let's say pollution, that if the whole standard of pollution, the whole topic of pollution has not been considered material, and that is the product of the materiality assessment, a brief explanation is to be provided by the preparer as to which topical standards as a whole have been considered as non-material. And this is actually a very important piece as well in the architecture. It happens, it takes place at topical level, it doesn't take place at disclosure requirement level. And the other concept that I would like to introduce, because it's actually quite core to the system, is the disclosure content. In order to ensure comparable information across undertakings and a standardization of content of the sustainability statements, minimum disclosure requirements have been developed for policies, actions, and targets. What does it mean? How do I apply that? So let's go into an example. Let's assume that undertaking A operates in the extractive sector, and pollution of soil has been identified according to IRO 1 as a material impact, risk, or opportunity. So I will be disclosing the material impact, risk, or opportunity from pollution on soil in SVM3 that we just saw in the previous slide. And I would be disclosing as an undertaking the policies, actions, and targets to address or manage that IRO. So the content of the policy that I'll be disclosing within the pollution section of the sustainability statements for pollution of soil will include as a minimum the disclosure content of policies. It could also be the case that in the case of pollution, in the standard, in the topical standard, there's additional data points that have to be included for the policies. But as a minimum, for all the topical standards, when there's a material IRO, the minimum content would be that from the disclosure contents, call them policies, actions, or targets. What happens if the company cannot disclose the information on policies because it has not adopted a policy? In that case, the company will be disclosing that this is the case, that there is no policy disclosed because no policy has been adopted. This information is captured centrally, the minimum disclosure requirements, the disclosure contents, but in terms of presentation, they will be presenting alongside the topical standard. So in this particular case, with the pollution topical standard and the pollution disclosure requirements. This is exactly the same case for targets. So targets shall be disclosed for all material risk, impacts, and opportunities. And the same case it will be if, for example, there is no target disclosed because the company has not adopted that. So the undertaking will be stating that fact. And last but not least, let me introduce you to the appendices of draft ESRS 2, which have been conceived as a navigation tool to identify the disclosure requirements or data points that are not subject to the materiality assessment. Example, those emanating from EU regulation, such as SFDR, Pillar 3, or the EU climate law. And also, we have in Appendix D, all the disclosure requirements in the topical standards, which are specifications of ESRS 2. So when we want to comply with ESRS 2, we should go through Appendix D to see where are the specification and extensions that have to be considered for each of the topical standards. And also, I suggest that it's actually quite interesting reading these disclosures, these appendices, because they explain how the ESRSs have taken into account the EU regulations. Thanks for watching. There's further material in our webpage. Enjoy your next ESRS chapter.